Hey, what's up, guys? So as I said, I'm going to review two games versus, I think he's like a 120 to 250 reg on lock Navtones. He's definitely one of the better regs that I've played on the site, really. I mean, I think he definitely has some pretty glaring leaks in some spots, but so maybe that kind of says that, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't think the average reg on lock is all that good, but I do think he's an okay player. I mean, I have a hard time exploiting him, mainly because he's just so capable. And that's what I talk about a lot in my videos is he just has bluffs in his range in a lot of spots, sometimes too many bluffs, maybe sometimes too few bluffs, but either way, no spot is easy versus him because he really is capable of a lot. So, I mean, he's willing to play back in a lot of spots, and usually that's going to make you a lot harder to play and just make ranges a lot harder to define. So I usually think that tends to be a good thing, and I usually think that like if someone is too spewy versus someone that is too nitty, that spewy player is always harder to play for the most part for me. So even though there's an edge there. So we can go ahead and get started. Yeah, so you can see on my HUD, it's pretty easy to read. He opens about 65% of his buttons, plays about 56% of hands out of position, which is reasonable amount. I think he could probably play a few more, and I think he actually does play a few more at deeper stacks. So he's really skeptical of me, and mainly because, I mean, he knows I'm capable too, that I put him in a lot of hard spots as well. That this is a board that I expect him to call off on with like a decent amount of hands. I think that 3-barreling the river here is pretty thin versus a lot of people, and versus a lot of people consider we need our value bet to work 50% of the time or more, that you could actually just check here or just bet a lot smaller than a jam. But I see him actually having a really hard time folding a ton of hands here. Queen 10, Queen 9. Even his Jack X and 8X at times, because I think that's a spot where he calls down too light. That I think my barrel versus him is super standard, but I also think it's a spot where people tend to go for too thin of value versus people that just aren't going to call light there. Like, yeah, you might have the best hand, but like, what do you get value from? And like, even if there are hands you get value from, are there enough hands that you get value from? Versus all the hands that make sense to be check calling into you that are ahead of you. I don't really have enough of a sample at like 20 to 25 stack sizes to really say definitively like what his frequencies change to. I think they're probably pretty similar with this pre-flop raise and maybe a little bit wider 3-bet percentage. So I definitely would have like a little bit of a limping range. He's 3-bet like 30% so far, but it's been a pretty small sample. But again, it can't hurt to be having a limping range there usually. Ace Queen hand, pretty standard, obviously. After winning a big pot, like I don't really, this is a pretty shitty hand, but he doesn't really, he like prefers to be aggressive rather than passive out of position at less than 20 big blind stacks. That he doesn't have a ton of the flatting range. He has some, but not much. That I think he's game flow wise going to be pretty satisfied after winning a big pot and expecting me to maybe min raise call a little bit lighter around this stack depth. And really, from what I've seen from him, he just doesn't have a ton of 3-bet bluffs in his range. That I think game flow wise it was a pretty good spot to raise any 2 cards. I'm definitely not raising any 2 normally, but I think that was a good spot for it. And then after he folds my min raise, when I have the 10-3, I went ahead and limped the 8-6. I really don't have a real handle for his ranges just yet. Like I can't say that he doesn't have 3-bet bluffs exactly. I mean, I haven't seen it. It's been a decent amount of hands, 880 hands. That I'm still pretty skeptical of it because it seems like his frequency is high, but I haven't seen hands be all that wide. King 10, definitely a min raise call versus him. If it's not a min raise call, if I find that it's not, then that means that his 3-bet shoving range is, pretty damn nitty for 11.5 big blind stacks. But King 10, better hand to min raise call than a hand like Ace 4. I would just jam the Ace 4, but the King 10 potentially dominates a lot more hands that he'd be willing to 3-bet shove. ace four doesn't really dominate too much, even though it's ahead marginally of a lot of hands as well. Ace four, we have a much bigger risk when we get flatted too, because his flatting range is going to realize equity pretty well. But again, like if I find that he's not flatting much, then I can definitely just min raise call that ace four, because there's no risk of being flatted. So like if you're not going to get flatted, then why not just min raise call? Like if you can play versus a wider range, it's going to be a good thing. You just saw me 3-bet bluff first hand of the game. Like his opening range is only 65%, which is kind of pushing the percentage. That's a little bit too nitty, I think, to have a whole lot of 3-bet bluffs. But I want to be capable versus him, and I think that ace-6 suited is a really good hand to be 3-bet bluffing. It plays well. It's probably like one of the best 3-bet bluffing hands that that even if I know that he's calling wide, I think 8-6 suited can still be pretty good, mainly because it's so opposite my perceived range that like I'm going to do great on ace-XX, king-XX boards, that he's going to miss a decent amount. And then the low boards I'm not going to get credit on, which are the kind of boards I'm going to be hitting. He levels himself a lot versus my check raises. Probably pretty spewy, but like again, kind of hard to deal with. Like it's pretty hard to check raise and get him to fold. Considering he c-bets a wide frequency, 75%, it should mean that he has a lot of air in his range, that I do need to have a check raise bluffing range versus that kind of frequency to do well versus him out of position, unless he's just like stationing off his stack constantly. But he's kind of competent. I mean, like I think he calls a little bit too wide, but it's pretty hard to deal with. I think that his pre-flop raising range is about 65-70% around the stack size from the stats I have so far. Even if it's 60-65%, this should still be okay. Pretty good hand to be 3-bet shoving. And really, from what he's seen from me, I don't think he's seen me 3-bet bluff shove all that much at that stack depth. This is another spot I would be raising the 10-3 off, and I think it's just a spot where he's not going to be 3-bet shoving me light after winning a big pot. But 8-7 off is a good hand to limp, and I kind of hate having to min raise fold it, considering like even if he is being nitty, he's going to be jamming like 30% of hands, just like king 10, queen jack, ace x, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. This would be a good board to check raise bluff versus a lot of players. They're going to have a lot of air there, but it's a board that he just defends kind of endlessly. That and that makes him hard to play, like I've said. His min-raising range, I think, is somewhere between, like, I don't even really know for sure, 55-65%. So basically, a 3-bet shove just has too much fold equity for such a strong hand. Jacks, I would just jam pre. Queens is, it's borderline. He's got a lot of min-raise calling ace-x and king-x, but I think I'm going to do better as a flat. And then I think when I lead the turn, he correctly jams his flush draw. There's some straight draws I'm going to be leading on the turn, other flush draws, and I'll probably be leading my bluffs there as well. I do think that was a pretty good flop for him to c-bet, though, because it's a board I should miss a lot. But at the same time, it's a good hand for him to check back. It's got some showdown value. I 3-bet the ace-9 off there to induce. I think it's something I talked about in my other hyper video. Actually, the sample YouTube clip I have up is about that, where I think I induce a wider 4-bet shoving range than would min-raise call a 3-bet shove. So I think he's going to jam his ace-2 over that 3-bet, but I think he would min-raise fold his ace-2 versus a 3-bet shove. It's kind of the debate between whether or not to not all-in 3-bet or to 3-bet shove, and it just varies depending on frequencies. 6-3 suited, I think that I probably could have just either limped it or folded it. Probably limped it. Game flow wise, I think, I don't want to put too much weight into game flow just because I don't know how much his range is actually affected by it. But from what I've played versus him so far, I feel like that's kind of like a game flow and stack depth situation where I get 3-bet shoved on a lot. I wasn't going to be min-raising incredibly wide, but I was kind of thinking that maybe it was a little bit too weak to be limping too. All right, so normally this would be a super standard barrel, but it's a turn card that I think that he literally, if he calls the flop, like he does not fold this turn. And that's where I think that I can get an advantage on him when I shut down some of my ranges. I mean, I do think that it's still worth stabbing the flop because he does have plenty of folds there. But I think when he calls, he's shutting down. I think it's pretty spewy to continue there without too good of equity. So I like my play there. And then minraise calling ace-8, really standard. Well, not really standard, I think, for most people. I think some people actually open shove it. I would probably... I would open shove like my ace-2 to my ace-5 maybe. Maybe like minraise calling ace-5 suited plus or something like that. Just because, like I said, I don't think that he has a ton of a flatting range. I think he has a few that I think I can adjust my range gradually, like I talk about a lot, not adjusting my range, completely, like 100%, where I just minraise call. I don't have an open shoving range anymore. I don't think I know enough about his flatting range out of position to say that. But yeah, I'm adjusting my range gradually. I would normally open shove a7 off and worse. So I think this is a board that hits his out of position calling range a lot. From what I know of it, that I've got some good showdown value, so I check back. If I had min raised, something kind of weak here, I'd probably c-bet this flop, mainly because it's at this stack depth. I'm usually c-betting something like 130 or 140. That it doesn't need to work that frequently. That if I had min raised like Jack 2 suited there or something like that for pre-flop fold equity, I would probably go ahead and still c-bet the flop just because it's only going to need to work 140 divided by 540, which it's like 25% or something, and no showdown value. The Jack 4 off, I think decent hand to min raise fold. I'm not like, it's kind of a situation where I'm kind of skeptical of like what's good and what's bad versus him in terms of like what kind of min raise folding frequency I should have. I mean, I certainly should have a limping range, a pretty substantial limping range of that stack depth, but I just don't have a handle on his 3-bet shoving range yet. But from what I've seen, it doesn't contain a whole lot of bluffs, as I've said. And now, like, obviously I'm nashing. I'm sure it's pretty standard for most of you guys. I don't really think there's a whole lot of room to do much else. 5 big blinds deep. Yeah, like another thing you can do, like just like when you're like 5.5 big blinds deep, is take a hand that's just barely outside of Nash, like maybe a hand that like whatever it is, Jack 3 off or something like that. Jack 3 off, I think, that you could jam at 5.2 big blind stacks, and you can min raise call it, because I think a lot of players, they won't have a flatting range, thinking players, and they will actually 3-bet shove over that min raise with a tighter range than they would call an open shove, and that can make your expectation better than the 5.2, and actually good enough for it to be better than folding at that point. So that's something I've thought about recently, past month or so. I think it's kind of a neat idea, just to kind of put people in a hard spot and at a stack depth where most people are just totally autopiloting. Standard here, obviously, and that is it for the video. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I tried to keep it a little bit shorter this time. I mean, you can expect most of my weekly feature videos to be in like the 10 to 15 minute range. Nothing like super high level theory or anything like that, like totally revolutionary. I'm going to leave a lot of that for headsupsitandgo.com. But, some just additional value for you guys, some reinforcement of things I've talked about a lot, and maybe something totally new for you guys that aren't headsupsitandgo.com members or just haven't seen my videos yet. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will be doing something next week. I'm not sure if it'll be a video or an interview just yet, but yeah, stay tuned. Thanks a lot.